All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about the Treaty of Hudaybiyyah. Now, on the surface, this thing looked like a total disaster, a complete surrender, really. We're talking about a list of concessions that just seemed humiliating. But what if that surrender wasn't a surrender at all? What if it was actually a strategic masterclass that completely changed the game?
And that brings us to the big question, right? How can a treaty that looks like an absolute surrender somehow become a great victory? It doesn't seem to make sense. Well, to figure this out, we need to go back in time, to a really tense standoff happening right outside the city of Mecca.
Okay, so here's the setup. For years, there's been this ongoing conflict between the early Muslims in Medina and the powerful Quraysh tribe in Mecca. Now, the Prophet and his followers are camped right near Mecca. They're not there for a fight, they just want to make a peaceful pilgrimage. But the Quraysh, they see a huge threat. It looks like a massive battle is about to break out. But then, instead of drawing swords, the Quraysh make a call. Let's negotiate. And you better believe they didn't send just any old diplomat for this job.
They sent in their top gun, Suhail ibn Amr. This guy was known as the sharpest, shrewdest mind they had. You know how it is. When the stakes are this high, you don't send in a rookie. You send in your best. And Suhail, he was the guy, picked specifically to make sure Quraysh came out on top no matter what.
So when the Muslims see this famously tough negotiator walking towards them, you'd think they'd be pretty nervous, right? I mean, I would be. But the Prophet's reaction is, well, it's the complete opposite of what you'd expect. He sees Suhail and says, "Your affair has been made easy for you." Wow. So while everyone else sees a huge problem, he sees an opportunity. It's a huge clue that there's a much deeper strategy going on here.
Okay, so the negotiations kick off, and the very first fight isn't about land, it's not about money, it's a battle over words. And these weren't just any words, they were words that got right to the heart of what it meant to be a Muslim.
Suhail comes in hot. Right away, he attacks two key phrases. First, he doesn't want the treaty to start with, "In the name of God the most gracious." He wants it to just say, "In your name, O God." A subtle but huge change. Then he goes for the big one. He demands that Muhammad, the messenger of God, gets changed to just Muhammad, son of Abdullah. And his logic was cold and simple. Look, if we actually believed you were the messenger of God, we wouldn't be fighting you in the first place. Now, you can imagine, for the Prophet's followers, this felt like a punch to the gut. It was a direct attack on their core beliefs. Ali ibn Abi Talib, the one physically writing the treaty, was just so overcome he couldn't do it. He flat out refused to erase the title, saying, "By God, I will never erase you." You can just feel the pain in that moment. It was a massive, massive concession. And yet, in this incredibly tense, emotional moment, the Prophet is the calmest person in the room. He just responds with pure pragmatism. He asks Ali, "Show me where it is," and then erases the title with his own hand. See, for him, the focus wasn't on the title. It was on the bigger prize, securing a peace treaty that would give Islam the space it needed to grow.
But believe it or not, the concessions weren't over, not by a long shot. What came next was the most controversial part of this whole deal, a condition so one-sided, so seemingly unfair that it just sparked outrage among the Muslims.
Just listen to this. It was a total one-way street. If someone from Mecca became a Muslim and tried to join the Prophet, they had to be sent back to their persecutors. But if a Muslim left the community and went back to Mecca, oh, the Quraysh wouldn't have to return them. It seems completely unjust, right? Like it was designed specifically to choke off the growth of the Muslim community.
So, this brings up the most obvious question in the world, the one everybody was thinking. Why in the world would you agree to that? It looks like you're just handing your opponent a massive win and getting nothing back. It seems like a terrible mistake, a huge strategic blunder. But was it?
And here is where the genius of the whole thing starts to shine through. The Prophet saw something nobody else did. He understood that, look, anyone who would flee from his community probably had shaky faith to begin with. Their leaving isn't a loss, it's actually a purification. It makes the community stronger. But even more important than that, by giving in on this point, he got something huge in return, a 10-year truce. And that peace, that was the ultimate prize. It created the breathing room for Islam to be shared, to be talked about, and to grow, all without the constant threat of war.
So you have this incredibly difficult treaty, and it gets put to the test almost immediately. And this wasn't some theoretical test, this was a real-world, heart-wrenching dilemma.
Okay, picture this. The ink on the treaty is barely even dry. The tension in the air is so thick you could cut it with a knife. And then, suddenly, a man comes stumbling out of the desert, heading straight for the Muslim camp. He's clearly in trouble, and he's desperate for help.
It turns out this man is Abu Jandal, and he's in chains. You can see the marks of torture on him, all because he became a Muslim. And then comes the twist, and it's a huge one. He's the son of Suhail ibn Amr. Yes, the same Suhail who just demanded this very clause be put in the treaty. The ultimate test was here, and it was personal.
Suhail doesn't even blink. He sees his own son, tortured and in chains, and without a moment's hesitation, he turns to the Prophet and says, "This is the first I hold you to account for." He's demanding his son be returned, right then and there, according to the treaty they just signed. Suddenly, this whole thing became intensely personal and deeply political.
And the Prophet's response is just one of the most difficult but principled moments in this whole story. He knows he has to honor the agreement, so he turns to a desperate Abu Jandal and says, "O Abu Jandal, be patient, persevere. God will grant you and those with you relief and a way out." He chose to uphold his word, to honor the treaty, even though the personal and emotional cost was just devastating.
Watching Abu Jandal get dragged back to Mecca, it broke the camp. Everyone was plunged into this state of shock and grief. It created a serious crisis of morale, and it was a moment where leadership itself was being tested in a way it never had been before.
His followers were just frozen, completely paralyzed by what they just saw. So when the Prophet commanded them to perform their pilgrimage rituals, to make their sacrifice, shave their heads, nothing happened. No one moved. And it wasn't defiance, not really. It was just this deep, overwhelming grief. A direct order from their leader had failed.
So how do you break a stalemate like that? With brilliant advice. The Prophet goes into his tent and talks to his wife, Salama, and her advice is so simple but so profound. She basically says, stop commanding, start acting. Go out there, don't say a word to anyone, and just perform your own sacrifice. He does exactly that, and the moment the people see him acting, it's like a spell is broken. They all get up and follow his example.
And this moment just reveals such a timeless truth about leadership, doesn't it? Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to issue another command. It's to seek out wise counsel and then to lead by example. Salama's wisdom solved a crisis that words alone just couldn't touch.
So this all brings us back to our big question from the beginning. That 10-year truce they won at Hudaybiyyah, it allowed Islam to spread like wildfire, but peacefully. In fact, they gained more converts in the next 2 years than in the entire 18 years before that. It just goes to show you, true victory sometimes means you have to endure some short-term pain to get that long-term gain. This whole treaty shows us that a smart, strategic compromise isn't a sign of weakness at all. It can be the very foundation for your biggest success. And that kind of leaves us with a question to think about, doesn't it? In our own lives, when is a compromise not a defeat, but actually the smartest path to victory?